My congratulations to all of you.
औपचारिक रूप से सबसे पहले सबका स्वागत करता हूं, विशेष रूप से प्रोफेसर आर.एस. मिश्रा जो हमारे स्कूल ऑफ फिलॉसफी कल्चर के डायरेक्टर रहे हैं, फैकल्टी ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटीज सोशल साइंसेस के डीन रहे हैं, रजिस्ट्रार, वाइस चांसलर, जितने बड़े पोजीशंस हमारे विश्वविद्यालय में हैं, सब पर आपने अपनी सेवाएं दी हैं। तो मैं आपका सर बहुत बहुत स्वागत करता हूं और आपका आशीर्वाद चाहता हूं। आज एक विशेष दिवस है जिस पर हम सारे लोग जुड़ रहे हैं। पुराने दिनों की जो यादें हैं उसको कुरूदते हुए मैं आपके ही निर्देशन में हम लोगों ने 2008 में सबसे पहले विश्व दार्शनिक दिवस मनाया था, वर्ल्ड फिलॉसफी डे 2008 में। और उस समय तो बहुत ही प्रोफेसर बरुआ आए थे, प्रोफेसर ललित मंगोत्रा आए थे, प्रोफेसर शिव निर्मोही थे। तो इतने सारे लोगों की यादें हम सबसे जुड़ी हुई हैं और मुझे व्यक्तिगत रूप से बहुत खुशी है कि हम आज दर्शन दिवस के दिन एक अपने दार्शनिक जो मेंटर हैं उनको देख पा रहे हैं। हमारे जो दो कलीग सुमंत सारथी शर्मा और डॉक्टर मधुमंगल चतुर्वेदी हमारे साथ हैं और हम 3 लोग हैं इस समय अपने विभाग में। तो आपके आशीर्वाद से हम लोग बहुत सारी यहाँ गतिविधियां कर रहे हैं। तो जो हमारे साथ हमारे स्टूडेंट जुड़े हुए हैं उनकी सूचना के लिए, जैसा मैंने पहले से दिखाया मेल के थ्रू और अभी जो स्लाइड दिखाया, हम लोग वर्ल्ड फिलॉसफी डे क्यों मनाते हैं इसके बारे में एक जो सूचना दी गई। यूनेस्को ने 2002 में वर्ल्ड फिलॉसफी डे का डिक्लेरेशन किया था और इसको जो नवंबर महीने का तीसरा बृहस्पतिवार होता है, थर्ड थर्सडे ऑफ नवंबर मंथ, इस तिथि को मनाने का निर्णय हुआ था और पूरे विश्व में ये दिवस मनाया जाता है आज ही के दिन। तो इस दिवस को मनाने के पीछे जो मुख्य कारण बताया गया था कि आज ही के दिन जो ग्रीक दार्शनिक सोक्रेटिस का जन्म माना जाता है और उनकी बर्थ एनिवर्सरी के रूप में हम विश्व दर्शन दिवस मनाते हैं। जैसा मैंने बताया कि हमारे विभाग में 2008 से प्रत्येक वर्ष ये दिवस मनाया जाता है। आज का जो एक क्राइसिस का समय है, इसमें हम इस माध्यम के तहत आप सबसे जुड़ रहे हैं। इस कार्यक्रम में आप सबका स्वागत है। I welcome you all from the core of my heart and I am very glad that our mentor Professor Ramashankar Mishra and along with him 2 of my colleagues, 2 our PhD students who got degree, one Dr. Simran Raina who got PhD in philosophy from our school, and we have Dr. Ravi Parihar who has just got his PhD degree from School of Languages and Literature from our university. So I welcome both of our alumni on this particular day. They are Doctor of Philosophy, so we are glad to have them with us. And then we have our students from BTech program and English as well as BBA program who have joined with us to celebrate the day. So I extend warm welcome to all of you. What we have planned for this session is to have, in fact, blessings of Professor R.S. Mishra. That is the main objective. And with his blessings, I propose only one thought, which I mentioned in my mail. It was related to the remark of the Director General UNESCO. She told that in this situation, in this difficult time, we as a student of philosophy, as an academic, as well as thinkers, need to reflect seriously on the future of humanity and the way we are going to be, the way we are going to live our life. The crisis has really raised a very serious question, and because of that, all the things which we have developed so far as humanity collectively, we see that all these things are not helping. In this crisis time, we see a kind of revision in human relationship. We see a kind of change in the dispositions of the people. So it is really a kind of existential crisis. Now, how we are going to cope with it, what could be the reasons for the way we are going to cope with it, that is really a genuine concern. So as a student of philosophy, what we decided today to have some reflection on certain ideas of the structure of arguments and the way those structures are discussed by Aristotle, who was the grand disciple of Socrates. And as you know, we are celebrating birthday of Socrates today. So before I request my colleague Sumant Sarthi Sharma to initiate the discussion, I would like to have words of blessings from Professor R.S. Misra, and then we will have his comments also on the presentation by your colleague. So I request Professor R.S. Misra to bless us with his kind words. Professor Misra.
Thank you, Dr. Anil. My blessings, my best wishes are always with you all. And I think it's a very good initiative. I think it is for the first time that you are having webinar. Am I right?
Yes, on World Philosophy Day, this is first time we are using this platform. Otherwise, yes, we have already conducted several events online.
Okay, but that's remarkable and very nice for me personally. It is very gratifying to have seen not only you and Sumanta. Of course, I've been missing for many years now, and he refused to kind of acknowledge me, isn't it? And Madhu, I think Madhu joined. When did you join, Madhu?
2012.
2012. And then, of course, Simran. When I read her name, it sounded a bell, but I couldn't really place her. And when she came, it took a second for me to recognize, oh, she. Very nice. Go ahead. I think let's start. It's my best wishes.
Now I request Sumanta to have a brief initiation of the discussion and then.
Okay, thank you, Tiwari ji. First of all, it is really a pleasure to see Professor Mishra again, because does not matter what, I will definitely like to apologize that I have not been in touch with most of the people for quite some time now, and especially I took refuge with the help of this COVID situation, because the lockdown was a boon for me, because I was really having a tough time doing my own work rather than doing somebody's else. So I got some time and I really put myself inside the cyst and tried to work, and I guess so I'm quite done with it. So I will become social again. Right now I'm quite asocial. I'm not antisocial, just that I'm a little asocial. I've also been missing on the social platforms, because beforehand I used to be very active on the social platform as well, or the social networking platforms, but now I'm not. It was just a way for me to complete certain kind of things. So I really apologize, sir. And if Professor Mishra would have been if I consider Professor Mishra as Socrates, then I have to consider myself as Aristotle, because he is also the grand teacher of mine, because I could not study under him in IIT Kanpur, but I definitely got a lot to study because of his abilities to, I still remember that I could not prove De Morgan's law without using De Morgan's law. And now I can prove De Morgan's law without De Morgan's law, I guess, so in 7 to 8 ways. And I keep on teaching my students. There is one current student who is already in the meeting. This is Gavesh. And there are other students as well who have studied under us. So it was really for us a blessing that we could be with you for a few years, and I think that it was too short, but still very output oriented kind of thing. And I still remember that one of the papers we have co-written together, and thankfully it was also published in a Scopus journal, so we can always put that thing up that it was in a Scopus journal. Anyway, so thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari, for providing me the opportunity to initiate the discussion today. I was just looking through, and I found that in the World Philosophy Day, I have been the initiator or have been the presenter a lot of times now. And I really feel very happy about it, and also feel very blessed about it, that I always get an opportunity under you people. Allow me to present also a few things. This paper is very technical by nature, but we will not go into the technicalities of it. Rather than we will try to stick to the idea which Dr. Tiwari proposed, as well as the concept, as per the concept note as well, that there is a need to rethink about a lot of things and see things in a way which was either not thought of or is not in vogue. And it provides a lot of I will say insights into searching for the truth, as well as searching for certain kind of structures. So recently I've been working on this, and this is a paper which I have co-written with Dr. Tiwari and Dr. Chaturvedi. I will share with you the screen so that we can have the paper with us. Now, this is the paper. I hope so that most of you can see it. The papers, Dr. Tiwari has put this thing up, that how justification undergirds the conclusion, a lesson from Aristotle. And it is true that this paper is actually about Aristotle and his ways. However, I have named this paper as Diagrammatic Isomorphism and the Venn-Pierce Diagrams for Syllogistic. Now, what is we will not go into the core of it. Rather, we will try to understand a very basic part of it, that what actually is happening. Now, let us go to a very basic or overview of the presentation. I will not take much of minutes. If I can ask Dr. Tiwari, how much time shall I take?
Maybe half an hour.
Okay, thank you. So it is 8:01 in my watch. So I will complete by 8:30:31. We will go for the basic preliminaries of this paper, that what are the things which we are discussing in this paper. We will also talk about the list of valid syllogisms. Some students know about syllogisms and validity. Some students may not be aware about it, but does not matter. You need to follow the line of argument. So that is more important. We will also talk about some numbers. These numbers have become very important for the study of syllogism. So we will talk about it. We will in a very short way, we'll like to see what are Venn-Pierce and what are Euler diagrams. Then we will discuss three very important concepts which are found in diagrammatic studies. Two of them are proposed by me, and one of them is already available in the texts or in the literature. And then we will go for the observation. So we will try to move fast from this part, so that we should not be bogged down by the technicalities of this paper. Rather, we will try to go for general observations and see that whether these kind of observations and these kind of approaches can help us with understanding certain concepts in a better way. Now, let me move further. The first thing is that there is a definition of syllogism, if you will see in Aristotle. So it is basically, the definition says like that, if something is stated, then something follows out of necessity. There was no understanding of whatever we understand by syllogism these days. Now, these are basically the moss or the dirt which has stick to the study of syllogism with each passing year, and then say decades and centuries, because the definition of syllogism as given by Aristotle was quite different from the definition what we study today. We talk in terms of mood and figure. We also talk in terms of validity or invalidity. There are two students who have, in fact, there are three students who have already studied syllogism and logic with us. And they know that when we define a categorical syllogism, we say that it must be having two premises, one conclusion, three terms, each of which occurring twice, and all these things. So these numbers have become very important. But this was not the case with Aristotle. So I will move with the preliminaries and go to the next one. The second thing is that Aristotle actually wanted to see that what are the pairs of propositions which will provide us with some kind of results. He was not interested in validity or invalidity. In fact, he never used this term validity or invalidity. He has used in some cursory references of validity or invalidity will be found, or else he will say that there is a syllogism which is formed, or a syllogism is produced, right? And in that way, he wanted to say that these are certain concludent and inconcludent pairs. I will talk about this a little bit later. He talks about this concludent and inconcludent pairs. Concludent pairs mean that a syllogism is possible. That means a conclusion is possible out of it. And a syllogism, if you do not know, is basically an argument. So we are talking right now about an argument, that how to check the validity or invalidity of an argument. So for Aristotle, it was not the question of validity or invalidity, rather a pair of propositions which can produce a result, or whether a pair of proposition cannot produce a result. The ones which can produce a result were called concludent, and the ones which could not produce a result were called inconcludent. However, in the later antiquity, and especially in the 14th century, there were certain changes with the because if you know the history, after Aristotle's death, and he was turned down from Athens, and the world has gone for a complete change, and nobody studied Aristotle. Greek philosophy was no more great at that point of time. Certain other things came. The death of Alexander and so on made the things very difficult and different at that point of time. Later in the 7th, 8th century, with the Logica Nova and the Logica Scotus, basically the medieval period, certain studies of Aristotle surfaced back, and people started studying and taking interest and all these things. But then there were a lot of changes. The lot of changes which has occurred was precisely because of that many of his texts could not be reproduced. Things were translated, and they were also understood in a completely different manner, because there was a gap between a lot of things. Now we have again, or the English world is having again access to certain basic works of Aristotle, and because of that we every now find certain new things and theories about him. Now the question is that the changes which took place in Aristotle's theory have molded or have changed the course of studying syllogisms as well. So it completely changed the way Aristotle studied syllogisms. Now, maybe these history may not interest you much, but still, if you see that this is basically the definition of a categorical syllogism as we study today. A categorical syllogism is a deductive argument form. Definitely, it was a deductive argument form as well in Aristotle as well, which comprises three categorical propositions. Now, this was not originally present. Two of them act as premises for a conclusion to follow. Now, Aristotle did, or he has taken in most of the cases, two premises and one conclusion. But again, he has not said that there has to be two premises and one conclusion. The categorical syllogism so formed contains precisely three terms, each of which occurs twice. So all these things which we read now over here, I guess so there is only one thing, that is syllogism is a deductive argument. That was all which was expressed by Aristotle, and he has a completely different methodology altogether. But then those methodologies are not accepted or adopted by the later logicians or the people who followed him. So what we see today is not actually the way he expressed it. Now, if you again see Aristotle's theory, he recognized 3 figures and 14 valid syllogisms. Now, this was the study, and this is something which he found out. But in the medieval era, after, or say by 14th century, the 4th figure was also added, and we found that there were 24 syllogisms valid. Now, this was the list. So from 14, they found 14 valid syllogisms. Now, can you see one thing, that there is an addition of 1 figure, and there is also an addition of at least 10 syllogisms which were found to be valid. So this number, or this understanding of number, has become very important, that every now and then you need to find a syllogism which is valid, there is a figure which is presentable in some fashion or the other. So this is the line of argument which was taken in the medieval era. But later there was this concept called strengthened and weakened moods. That means that if the premise is sufficiently strong, so you can weaken it, and suppose if the conclusion is weak, and you can again strengthen it. So I will not go into the I will say the technicalities of this, but the syllogisms were reduced because certain syllogisms were nothing but the strengthened or the weakened mood of another syllogism. So if you can see that there are spaces here, 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 and here, which were taken back. That means that if you see the last slide, all these syllogisms were like this, but now they were taken back. Few, in fact, you can see that 5 syllogisms were taken back, and from 24 the list came to 19, that okay, these 19 are basic syllogisms which are valid, the rest of them can be understood as the strengthened or the weakened moods. So fine, again, if you see, numbers were the things which people were trying to play. If you move a little bit forward and come to the modern era, that means with the 18th, 19th century understanding, with the intervention of Boole, with the intervention of Frege, and later on with Venn and then Peirce diagrams, you will find the list of syllogisms. You can find it in any textbook of logic, that there are 15 syllogisms which are valid, and this is basically the list, and there are 4 figures. Now, as I'm telling you, that these numbers have become very important. Mostly you will find that people will agree that there are 256 syllogisms which are possible, out of which some will say 14 are valid, that was Aristotle. 24 are valid, Medieval Logicians Part 1. 19 are valid, Medieval Logicians Part 2. 15 are valid. This is basically the study of I will say modern logicians. And a person like me has also found that 8 syllogisms are valid, because I also published a paper on this. But the question is not about numbers. The question is about something more important and more pivotal to the understanding of syllogisms. And that is something which we have missed out. In fact, there is a paper by Colin Williamson, he died recently, where he said that there are 2, 6, 2, 1, 4 syllogisms which are possible. And if you will see his paper, it's an amazing paper. Believe me, I'm not a big fan of people who do not go as per the conventions of the syllogism. But this paper is an amazing paper, and he has talked about syllogisms from very, very different ways. I can provide you with the reference as well. We have the references. And there he found 24 plus 24, that is equal to 48 syllogisms which are valid over there. And his way of dealing with syllogisms is a little bit different, but again, it makes a lot of sense. Then a person like Lewis Carroll, you know, the author of Alice in Wonderland, his actual name was Charles Dobson. He found that there are exactly 3 syllogisms which are valid. Or in fact, you can bring the list of syllogisms to 3 only. That was his idea. And again, you can read his book, The Game of Logic. It's again an interesting book, and a very he was both poetic or say into prose and poetry, as well as into logic, and he wrote amazingly as well. And he has also shown it with the help of diagrams. Now, why I'm bringing this concept of diagrams over here? Because diagrams open up the understanding of syllogisms. And now you will, why I am bringing this concept again, you will find it soon with a few concepts which I will be discussing in this paper. But numbers kept coming. There are n number of papers which either reduce the number of syllogisms or increase the number of syllogisms. Some will say that this is the way syllogism should be studied. Some will say that is the way syllogism should be studied, and so on. So there is a lot of, I will say, deliberation on the numbers. Therefore, I kept this slide name as also numbers. But if we move forward and see Venn pairs diagrams, so we know that these are basically Venn pairs diagrams. Now, why I'm showing you these diagrams, many of you are aware of Venn pairs diagrams. Many of you may not be aware of Venn pairs diagram. But there is one thing which I can tell you, and you can also understand this if I make it a little bit bigger. So if you see this, this is basic Venn diagram or Venn pairs diagrams actually. And if you see all S is P, right? So if I ask anybody that what will be the diagram of all P is S, so you can see that then the part of if the shading is on the left side. Now, once you will make all P is S, the shading will be only on the right side. The left side will be empty. Now, it is a little bit technical, but just to give you an idea that the left side, I will come back. This shading from here will actually go to this part. Okay. However, this will not be the case over here and here, because here it cannot go anywhere else but here only. The same goes for the I proposition as well. But again, in O proposition, that is some S is not P, this cross will go over here, or this X mark will go over here. That is the idea which I want to tell you, or something like that. Why I'm giving you this example, or why I'm taking you this taking this example, because there is a concept called diagrammatic congruence. And also there are concepts like say this one, counterpart equivalence. Now if you see these two diagrams, these two diagrams looks very different, right? If you see A, B, C and their positioning and so on. But if you look at them a little bit more, say, if you concentrate a little bit more, you will see that they are basically the same diagram. So at least same diagram means that they are representing the same information. Why I'm saying that they are representing the same information? You can see that there is a circle C, and inside, completely inside that, there is a circle A. So circle A in both the diagrams is exactly inside circle C, right? So you can understand this. Then if you see circle B, so B is, some part of B is outside circle C and some part of B is inside circle C. So this is also common between the two diagrams. And if you see again closely, you will find that B and A intersects. So B and A also intersects on both the diagrams. So if you see, these are called as counterpart equivalence diagrams. That means that irrespective of the fact that they are not geometrically the same, but they represent the same information, there is absolutely same representation which is possible with these two diagrams, because C will be the superset of A, and A and B are intersecting, right? And A is a proper subset of C. So if you see these two diagrams, so this is called in diagrammatic understanding as the understanding of counterpart equivalence. Now, counterpart equivalence precisely means that there can be two diagrams which do not look congruent, or they do not look geometrically same, but they display or they represent the same information. That is the idea, or that is something which we are trying to understand here. Now, there is also a concept called, okay, you can also take it with the help of a Venn diagram. So if you see in this case as well, they are exactly the same diagrams, right? I have just moved or say changed the orientation of the circles, or else if you see, the S, the M and the P are exactly the same. If you rotate one of them in some way, so you will find that it will produce the same diagram. You can see it for yourself. You can check it with the diagram. So they are basically called as counterpart equivalences. Now, there is a difference between the last diagram, which we saw, this one and this one. In the last one, irrespective of the fact how much you move them or how much you orient or disorient them, they will never look exactly the same. but in this diagram they will look exactly the same as well if you change the orientation of these two diagrams, right? So this is something which you can understand, because if we move the right diagram for a clockwise spin, so slowly and slowly it will become the same diagram as you can see over here. Okay, so these are certain things like these are certain things which you need to understand from the diagrammatic reasoning, that these kind of these are certain things which you will see in diagrammatic reasoning which you may not be able to see when you are doing, say, logic with the help of symbols, or logic even with the help of language, or with the help of sentences and propositions and statements and so on. Because statements and propositions may not express things exactly the way as diagrams will, because diagrams will always have the same representation. I will give you the example a little bit later. Let us come to this diagram, and those people who understand logic will understand that they exactly look the same and they are the same diagram, but actually they can be called as different diagrams as well, because one of them is EI1, one is EI2, the third one is EI3, the fourth one is EI4. That means that the change in the figure does not make a change in the diagram of these syllogisms. And the thing is, and again, it's a technical thing, but I may tell you, because when we will come to the observations, it will be easier for you to understand that why I was talking about all these things. The thing is that we do name certain things differently, but in reality, they may all be the same, right? However, until and unless we can see the line of reasoning or the diagram or the say process, we will always consider them to be quite different. So why I am proposing, or why I am representing all these things before you, is because first thing is that diagrams are easy for all of us to understand, because we do not need a lot of study for it, because you can very clearly see that these all diagrams look the same. And if I tell you that these all diagrams look the same, but they represent different information, so you will say that, look, I don't think so that they are different representations, because if they look the same, they may be also representing the same information, as I told you in the last few slides, as well as the diagrams. So this understanding has to come, that irrespective of the fact that we are naming it in a different way, they actually are the same things. It's like when we differentiate between sentence and statement, we say that there can be different languages used for different sentences, but then they all represent the same proposition, right? Or they all represent the same statement. So given that understanding, I'm trying to bring this point a little bit further. In fact, if you see these two diagrams, they also look the same, but they represent again very, very different information. One is an A, the other one is an E proposition, if you see, but they belong to two different figures altogether, right? And if you see this diagram, it does not represent only say EI. Usually, if suppose somebody asks you that, okay, draw EIO, so you will draw this diagram. Does not matter whether it is EIO1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And now let me add to this. It's not only EIO1, 2, 3 or 4. It is EI. After that, you can put A, E, I, O, and then there will be 1, 2, 3, 4. So actually, it is a diagram which is representing 16 syllogisms, out of which 4 are valid and 12 are invalid. That is how we say. Now, the question which comes to our mind very fast is that the same diagram represents both valid as well as invalid argument. Is it, or is it making sense? Because if we say that an argument can be either valid or invalid, and this is the diagrammatic representation for it, so how can the same diagram represent validity as well as invalidity? So you need to go beyond this thinking and understand that it's not the question of validity or invalidity. Rather, it is the question of concludent pairs of propositions which are premises, or the inconcludent pair of propositions which are acting as premises. So if there is a concludent pair, you will find that some information can come out. If it is an inconcludent pair, then irrespective of the fact, whatever you are trying to do, any resultant will not follow. That is the idea. But Come on, let's move further. I will not take this. I was talking about this, that E and I propositions are actually diagrammatically identical. However, the A and O propositions are not diagrammatically identical. That means if you change the subject or the predicate of these propositions, so the diagrams are different. But in case of E and I, the diagrams are not different. We also know that the middle term, it's all about the position. So those people who know about the position of the terms and all these things will understand that there are two ways actually in which the things are changing. If you see below, these are basically the position of the middle terms and the first, second, third, and fourth figure. But I will not like to go more into this right now. I will try to show you the diagrams. If you see above, I have not written the conclusion. I have only written the premises. A1 looks like this, 2 looks like this, 3 looks like this, and 4 looks like this. AO also 1, 2, 3, and 4 looks like this. Then OA 1, 2, and 3, 4 looks like this, and OI 1, 2, OO 1, 2, 3, 4 looks like this. Now, these are basically not representing only, say, 16 syllogisms, but 16 into 4 syllogisms. That will be around 64 syllogisms. Now, if you come to here, then you will see that even one diagram is representing two figures, right? Like AE 1 and 3, that means 1 and 3 figure, and so on. So you will see that there are a lot of syllogisms which are representing, or diagrams which are representing actually two figures, and obviously two combinations. Okay, fine. I'm again not getting into the detail of it, but just I'm trying to show you that this is what is happening. And if I show you this slide, it is actually showing that one diagram is representing actually four figures: EI, E, IE, and II. So if you see that these are representing actually four representations. Now, what I'm trying to bring in front of you is that this number game of 256 syllogism, or 264144 syllogisms, or 48 syllogisms valid, or 24 syllogisms valid, 14 syllogisms valid, 19 syllogisms valid, may not take us anywhere, or has taken us enough, and now there is no potency in pursuing a field as well as the trajectory like that. The more important thing for us to understand is that whether we have a concludent pair, that means can a syllogism be formed out of it, or we do not have a concludent pair. That is the idea. So actual number of syllogisms, if you see, these are basically 36 rather than 256. The number 256 which used to come, I can give you the calculation of it as well, is not the right way of putting it. Rather than it is 36 because of these 36 diagrams. If you count, these are 12, 15 plus 16 is 32, plus 4 is 36. Yeah. So there are exactly 36 ways in which syllogisms can be produced. However, irrespective of the fact that the syllogism can be produced, but they will not have concludent and inconcludent pairs. Rather, the number is very, very less. So I will bring your attention to this thing, that in numerous passages of Analytica Priora is basically the book of Aristotle where you will find the theory of syllogism. He said like this: there will be a syllogism. There is a syllogism. A syllogism is formed. A syllogism is possible. Or he wrote, there will be no syllogism. Now, the above expressions like there will be a syllogism, there is a syllogism is formed, or a syllogism is possible, is basically representing the concludent pair. However, there will be no syllogism is basically representing an inconcludent pair, or a syllogism is not possible. So this is the line of argument which we may need to take, rather than the line of argument which has been pursued since, say, the medieval era, through antiquity, and then even to the modern logician. I will again not go into this detail much, but rather I will bring your kind attention to another fact. Many people can object to this, that a Venn pairs diagram or any diagram does not represent a syllogism. Rather, it represents only two propositions, right? Because what we draw are only the propositions of the premises and not the conclusion. The conclusion should come out of it. Now, for this, Buridan himself, who is again a medieval logician, said, it seems to me that Aristotle takes a syllogism not to be composed of premises and conclusion, but composed only of premises from which a conclusion can be inferred. Now, if you follow this line of argument, then you will follow very clearly that the understanding of concludent and inconcludent pairs in syllogistic is far more important and valued than the understanding of validity and invalidity, right? And moreover, does not matter. Professor Mishra is also here, and I will like to listen to his comments as well, that whenever we are taking an argument, what we work with is the premises. We are not working with the conclusion. The conclusion must appear to come out, or the conclusion must be proven, right? The conclusion is never taken in the argument. The conclusion has to come out with the set of premises. That is the whole idea. Now, there can be a lot of understanding that the conclusion itself can be the premise of an argument if it is a tautology. We understand that. But in any way, if you see, we are not bothered with that what is the conclusion. We are bothered with the premises and whether those premises can supply a conclusion to us. That is the idea, or that is the thing which we are looking for, right? Again, I will not like to go on this line because then there will be a lot more to discuss. There are also a lot of other things over here which I will not like to talk about right now, but maybe I will like to come to a far more general point by Francis Bacon, who said that truth emerges more quickly from error than from confusion. And if we talk about invalid syllogisms, or if we take invalid syllogisms into consideration, we will actually understand that, or the notion of inconcludent pair, we understand that actually nothing is an invalid thing, rather it is an inconcluding thing, right? The overemphasis on how many or the number of syllogisms or the figures is basically a later outcry. The essence of syllogism was in the understanding of concludent and inconcludent pair. So these are certain things which I will like to bring. I guess so I am quite close to my time, but I have just a couple of slides before I finish. So the first thing is that if you see Aristotle, or if you see the whole theory of syllogistic logic with the lens of diagrams, and with especially the lens of Venn pairs diagrams, then it takes us again back to the Aristotelian era. Many people will say that Venn diagrams do not validate Aristotle's logic. I know that. But what I'm saying is it does tells us that Aristotle was more interested in concludent and inconcludent pairs rather than saying that Dharapti and Brahmantip are basically valid syllogisms. So the importance is that if we can see things in front of us, the solutions look far more viable and the solutions look far more clear to us, rather than if we argue or if we analyze but we cannot see it properly, right? Because human mind is also a very having that pictorial memory and tries to figure out that how things work and so on with the help of some kind of pictures, right? Or some kind of diagrams. So with the help of diagrams, you can also see that nothing is valid or invalid. It's just the concludent as well as the inconcludent pairs. So this was my last, or this was our, in fact, last search, that there are actually 8 concludent pairs. I can name them: AA, AE, AI, AO, EA, EI, IA, and OA. And there are 8, in fact, inconcludent pairs as well, which are EE, EO, IE, II, IO, OE, OI, and OO, which we found with this study. So I rest my case with you guys now, and I will also stop presenting so that we can start with the discussion.
If we consider 4 propositions, and if we consider the organization of them into, let us say, pairs of 2 propositions and engaging all the 4, so we can have maximally 16 organizations, right? Altogether 16 organizations by engaging our 4 propositions, 2 at a time, right? So 4 into 4. The way we calculate, by engaging 3 at a time, we can have 256 figures, including including the 4 figures plus 64 modes, right? So if we consider 4 propositions and see only the premises, consider we depict only the premises in our diagram. Maximally, we can have 16 possibilities of depiction in the premises, considering 4 propositions and their 16 combinations. And I guess you have reduced these 16 into even further 8 or so. Considering these, some of the pairs are inconcludent pairs, as you just said in the last. The concludent pairs have got a definite number. Then we have certainly, I think, 8 altogether, 8 figures finally.
We have
Whether
8 concludent as well as 8 inconcludent pairs.
8 concludent and 8 inconcludent. That is the situation. Now Professor Mishra is connected.
Yeah, I'm connected now.
Sir, may I request you to have some observation, some suggestions?
No, I think go ahead. I would like to. I missed out.
Yes, Sumanta, then I was saying, as you said, 8 out of 16, 8 concludent and 8 inconcludent.
Yes.
And when we say concludent pair, which means we are talking about the so-called valid syllogisms, right?
No.
Or it could be invalid also.
It can be invalid as well. Concludent pairs precisely mean that there is at least one conclusion which follows out of those premise pairs, right? So like if we take AE and then we say E, then definitely this is a concludent, because AE is a concludent pair, and with that E can come out as a conclusion, right? But with AE, A cannot come out as a conclusion, because we know that if one premise is affirmative and one is negative, then the conclusion has to be negative. But if we say AE as premises and then we take A as the conclusion, so irrespective of the fact that it will be an invalid syllogism, but it is coming from a concludent pair only, right? So concludent pairs will produce both valid as well as invalid syllogisms, but inconcludent pairs will only produce invalid syllogisms.
Okay, that is the difference. Okay,
that is the difference.
So let us say the inconcludent pairs are completely identical with, let us say, invalid arguments.
Again, I will not call it invalid arguments. Rather, you can call it invalid or say inconcludent pairs only, because they will produce a lot of arguments. Like if you take EE is a inconcludent pair, because both of the premises are negative. Now, whether you take A as the conclusion or E as the conclusion or I as the conclusion or O as the conclusion, whether you go for the first figure, second figure, third figure or fourth figure, everywhere you will find it to be an invalid syllogism. So the idea is not to call something, because if you call something valid or invalid, it means that you are taking care of the premise as well as the conclusion. However, if you are calling something concludent and inconcludent, you are actually talking about the pair of premise, not the conclusion.
That a pair of premise, just on the basis of the pair, how can we say them concludent or inconcludent in complete disregard to conclusion?
Yeah, that is a very nice question. Thank you, Tiwari ji. If we draw both the premises and we try to see, like suppose we take the Venn diagram, right? Like if I will like to show you with the help of this board. Yeah, can you see the board?
Yes.
Right.
You need to write little bigger letters or figures.
I will draw. Yes. Now, suppose if I have a inconcludent pair, right? Or whatever pair. Let me suppose a pair. Does not matter. I do not know whether it is a concludent pair or an inconcludent pair. I do not know, but I will take. Like suppose if I take A and I, right? And I take some figure, let's say one figure. So I make the diagram like this. And this will be all M is P. This will be sum S is M. And I do not know the conclusion. I am not taking the conclusion at all. I'm just taking the premise, right? So I know that this is diagrammed as MP bar is equal to 0. And this is taken as SM not equal to 0, right? Now, if I diagram it, right, and I will diagram it here so that you people can see. I diagram it like this: S, P, and M, right? All M is P. The part of M which is not there in P, I diagram it complete. It looks like that it has been shaded. Now, some S is M. The part of S and M, common part of S and M, if you see this part, so I put the crossover here, right? Okay. Now, how to consider whether it is a concludent pair or an inconcludent pair? By diagram, you can see that we have talked about M and P, we have talked about S and M. Now the conclusion which follows in the conclusion in a syllogism, there should be a relation between S and P. Now, how S and P can be related? Either they can be related in all, or they can be related as some, or they can be related as some not, or they can be related as no, right? That is the whole idea. Now, if you see S and P, this is the common part of S and P, and you find a crossover here. So you at least can very clearly see that I will follow out of it. You know, the other things will not follow. The A will not follow. The E will not follow. The O will also not follow, because if you see it in this diagram, the relation between S and P, there is no relation between S and P, except for that there will be only an answer called I, because some will follow because of this cross mark or X mark as we are talking about. So the question is again not about premises and conclusion. The question is about, when you draw the premise, is the premise potent enough to produce a conclusion? If it is potent enough to produce a conclusion in whatever way it can produce, then it is a concludent pair. However, if it is not strong enough or potent enough to produce a conclusion, then it will be an inconcludent pair. That is the idea.
What sense double E is inconcludent?
Okay, I will show you. If I take E and E, irrespective of whichever figure, I diagram it like this. The first relation will be between P and M. So I will shade this part. Does not matter whichever figure you are taking. Okay. And the second relation will be between F and M. So you will diagram this figure, this part. Okay. Now, if you want a conclusion like A, so this part has to be shaded, but you can see that this part is not shaded because this part is not shaded. If you wanted a conclusion like E, then this part should have been shaded, but this is not shaded. If you want a cross or an X mark, so you know by shading you can never develop a cross mark, right? So neither A nor E nor I nor O will be possible, and therefore EE, irrespective of the fact, in whichever way, first figure, second figure, third figure, fourth figure, whichever figure you take, it will always be an inconcludent pair.
Will it complicate the matter if we consider traditional logic, where every class is, let us say, considered to be an existent class?
No.
So the blank space is
the concludent and the inconcludent pair premise, the concept comes from Aristotle only. Aristotle is basically the father of traditional syllogistic. In fact, he is the father of syllogistic. He may not be called the father of logic for that matter, though Kant calls him the father of logic as well, which not many people believe in. But he is definitely the father of syllogistics, and the concept of concludent and inconcludent pair actually comes from Aristotle. But since his studies could not surface properly, and he is also a misunderstood person like many other old philosophers, the thing is, these diagrams actually opens us to the understanding that we can actually even have a, I will say, sneak peek into what was there might be in Aristotle's mind as well, that when he programmed his logic or when he started his logic, that how he may have seen the things. In fact, it is proposed, it is now proved that Aristotle has also used diagrams, but like class notes and so on, but it could not survive. And because the beauty of Aristotle's syllogistic cannot be understood only by the ways or means which are available to us, that these are the things which Aristotle has used. He must have used diagrams, he must have used certain other things as well, but it could not have survived. And therefore this beautiful and such a good theory, strong theory, has survived even so many years, even after there are a lot of revisions which has taken place, and there is absolutely no doubt about it, but it has survived, and it has still uh, ways to amaze us, right? So it is the case that there are a lot of things, and the thing is that an old approach is found also in the new approach, and the new approach is also or the new diagrammatic understanding is also trying to tell us that the old approach was good, rather than something which came in between and may have convoluted the understanding of syllogistic. That is what I was trying to propose, or was trying to say, that if we go back to Aristotle and try to see it from the concludent and inconcludent pairs understanding, it gives a far better insight into logic, syllogistic, rather than the way the numbers and the figures and the moods have played its role.
Yes, sir. So if you don't mind, I have a remark. Like, so in the context of in the context of your question, Anil sir's question, so like when you say that a pair of premises, like you considering them to be concludent if they are capable of producing results, right? So if you compare it to general philosophy, like जैसे हम लोगों को consider करते हैं, तो you'll be like कि if a person is capable of producing results, that if the person has the potential to produce results, that person is called capable, right? That is the concept of concludent premises or concludent pairs. But the whole my point is that when I'm saying that this person is has the potential, this person is capable, but what is the fun of that potential if it is not producing results?
It produces result, Sagun. The thing is that it is producing result, maybe in one way, but not in many other ways, right? When you say something concludent, it has the look. Try to understand. This is very philosophical and good that you are asking this question. You know how standards are calculated? Like suppose a company is an ISI company, or some company is an ISO standard company, or like some university is a NAC A plus or A or B plus, because they have the potential. They do stuff in a way that can produce a result. You can never say that, okay, 100 students have cleared this examination, so this university will be an A plus university, or 100 products have come from this company, therefore this company is an ISO company. No. If they are following a pattern, if they are following a paradigm through which results are coming out, so we say that, okay, this is having a standardization. That is the understanding. So regarding concludent pair and inconcludent pair is also, I'm not talking about that whether the potentiality will turn into actuality as well, which was also Aristotle's concept, but a tree is a potential table as well, because it has wood, right? So the thing is that if you do not have wood, then you will not be able to create something which is wooden. So if you do not take into consideration concludent pairs, you will not come out with a conclusion, right? That is the idea. But yes, definitely concludent pairs can produce invalid syllogisms. Inconcludent pairs cannot produce valid syllogisms. That is the idea, right? Concludent pairs will produce valid as well as invalid syllogisms. There is no doubt about it, because they are again from different paradigm. It's like since Mishra sir is back, and I will like to poke him with this understanding, like a deductive logician will say that all inductive arguments are invalid as well, irrespective of the fact how strong or weak they are, right? But then the parameter of inductive logic is not validity or invalidity. Rather, the parameter of inductive logic is strong or weak. But definitely from a deductive logician's point of view, all of them are invalid. There is absolutely no doubt about it.
That is in fact because the conclusion follows from necessity from the premises in deductive, and the inductive arguments talk about the possibility or potentiality, probability of their conclusion, their support. So I request Professor Mishra to have some remark and suggest something.
I have, as I was saying before it went off, that I have no in-depth study of Aristotelian logic, so I cannot ask really a substantial a question. But when you say that both concludent syllogism and inconcludent syllogism, they both have the potential. Am I right? I can't hear.
Sir, concludent and inconcludent are basically pairs of premises. They are not syllogisms.
Okay, pairs are premises, and both have the potential to produce yield conclusions.
No, only concludent pairs have the potential to produce valid results. Inconcludent pairs produce only invalid results.
So, what is the significance of saying that concludent pairs, they also have the potential?
They do not have the potential to produce valid syllogisms, sir.
Well, that's what I want to understand. What does it mean to say that they have the potential to produce invalid syllogism?
That means that those pair of premises will produce no valid syllogisms. Like suppose if we take A, then it can produce a conclusion only with A. It cannot produce.
No, I am asking something different. I am saying, what is the point of saying that they have the potential to produce, let us say, some proposition? The proposition that they would produce would not be a valid proposition. So what is the value of this potentiality? I mean,
concludent and inconcludent pair premises actually tell you that there are certain set of premises or pair of premises which cannot produce conclusions. Those which cannot produce any conclusion whatsoever will be called as an inconcludent pair. There is absolutely nothing possible out of it. Now let us talk about concludent pairs which can produce conclusions. Again, try to understand. Concludent pair premises can produce invalid syllogisms as well, but they have the potentiality also to produce some syllogisms which are valid. That is the idea.
Sir, I think just may I rephrase the sir's question? I think he wants to understand the significance of this distinction between the concludent and inconcludent. If inconcludent can only produce invalid, so what? Maybe you want to show that they account for invalid syllogisms because they can only. But what is the significance of this distinction? I guess this is his point.
The significance of this distinction is that whatever we have called valid or invalid syllogisms are actually premise pairs rather than fully a argument or an argument, precisely because that an argument is formed only when the premises comes. An argument cannot form in vacuum, right? So the whole thing is that we have been understanding this syllogisms from a point of view of that this is an argument which is valid and this is an argument which is invalid. But actually it is not the argument which is valid or invalid. It is the pair of premises which is concludent and inconcludent. And if you take a conclusion which can come out from that concludent pair, then that argument becomes valid as well. It's like the difference between soundness and validity. When we say an argument is sound, when the argument is valid as well as its premises are true. And obviously it will make its conclusion as true as well. But not every valid argument will be a sound argument, but all sound arguments will be valid arguments.
So, but what is the gain? What is the gain of having this distinction? I mean, if you can explain concludent pair of premises also capable of producing invalid syllogism or invalid conclusion, what is the point of having the second?
Actually, sir, we should not understand syllogism from the point of view of valid or invalid. That is what I am trying to say. Rather than we should understand syllogisms from the understanding of what kind of premises make a syllogism possible or it will not make a syllogism possible. We can have only O, and this is the truth about Aristotelian as well as about modern logic, that there is only one type of conclusion which is possible from a pair of premise. In rest, all the three cases, it will be invalid. Like from EI, you will have only O. You cannot have A, you cannot have E, or you cannot have I from it. So if you take EI as premise, irrespective of the fact that whether you have O as the conclusion or A as the conclusion, or I or O, whatever you have as the conclusion, EI plays the important role. And from EI, if you will diagram, or if you will even reason, for that matter, you use symbols, or you use, say, any of the Aristotelian method, or you use any of the medieval method, you will find that only one conclusion comes out, and that is O. In rest all the cases, even if you take EI as premises, it will have a wrong conclusion or an invalid conclusion. That is the idea. So if you understand this concept, you will see that it is not 256 syllogisms which are forming, rather than only 36 syllogisms which are possible in in this, with the help of these four premises. First thing. Now, second thing is that when you are working with a syllogism, rather than calling it valid or invalid, because you will have the same diagram for a valid argument as well as for an invalid argument, right? It is like having two different understanding for the same. Say, if I show you this thing and you call it like, okay, this is biscuit in British English and cookie in say American English, so actually I'm referring to the same thing. So rather than naming it in two different ways, if you come to the distinction of premises, then it makes the study even more clear, or the understanding more clear, that actually we are referring to the same thing rather than two different things. We have names, we have figures like the mood and the figures. We have also, because of the confusion, we have more iterations, or more, I will say, permutations and combinations for the same thing. That is that is what I'm saying. Like, you are having 8 names for only one thing. So are these 8 things different? No, they are the same thing. But if you see it from one place, it look different. That is the idea. Or if you are naming it with another convention, it becomes different. It's like the concept of morning star and evening star, isn't it? We refer to the same thing, but we have two different way of naming.
I would like to just ask one more thing. I mean, just as maybe you just to elaborate. For suppose we have this idea of inconcludent pair. So for
We
all
have
practical,
very beginning.
and so right now, so for us, you have already told us the way you have explained us. So we now know that for inconcludent pair, we don't need not worry. They will always, give you the invalid syllogism. So no problem there. For concludent pairs, I'm thinking in terms of how much will it
No,
undermine the use of figure.
Madhu, just a second. I think it will not give you any kind of syllogism. It would not give you any.
It will basically idea is that by definition, inconcludent. Just for the sake of the argument, let's say that okay, this is what the purpose is to show that will always be invalid. So hence it is inconcludent. But when we have the concludent pairs, so does it undermine the emphasis on the very idea of concludent and concludent as such, undermines the use of figures?
Yeah, truly speaking, fourth figure is a redundant cook. And it's not only I who have proved it, it has been proved many a times, right? And through many ways. Regarding the first, second, and third figure also, you will find that there are certain things which can be represented in one way, and certain things we may not require it even another representation, because it is one and the same thing. So it's not only the question of reducing the numbers and this and that, rather to have more clear understanding that if we, because we can also change the subject and predicate of the conclusion. And if you see A4, you will find that it is going to be it will be a valid result if you change the position of the subject and the predicate term, right? And if you diagrammatically see it, it is not exactly the same as AAA1. So there are certain things like that. But the question is that once you diagram, and once you understand the notion of concludent and inconcludent, or once you understand that there is another way of looking into a thing, then you see that whatever we have, like, it's like shaving the, what is it called? The, whose beard, sir, which we have shaved? Occam's razor, right? So
Aristotle's beard.
So it's like that we have unnecessarily multiplied things, like 256 syllogisms, like 24 valid, like 19 valid, like 15 valid, but it boils down to only 8 concludent pairs in which there is a possible conclusion. Rest all makes no sense. That is the idea, and definitely it will have an impact on the figure, especially on the fourth, because the fourth is quite redundant by nature. It was not required, but since it gave a symmetry, therefore it was added. Allegedly by Galen. Nicholas Rescher believes that it was Galen only, but many people do not believe, which includes Vukashevich and Shupechki.
One question, absolutely aside, it
Yes.
may not be relevant at all. When do you call a proposition a premise?
When do we call a proposition a premise?
Or when does a proposition become a premise?
If it is given in the argument.
Now, take the example of inconcludent pair of premises.
Yes, sir.
Would they make an argument?
They definitely are stated, but there is no conclusion which follows out of it.
So they are stated. Does that mean it depends on the intent of the speaker, and there is nothing unique in the proposition itself which makes it either a possible premise or no premise at all?
In fact, it is the potency of the premise or premise, as you say. I use premise precisely because premise is a proposition for Aristotle, and premise is basically what we call as Adhar Vakya, right? So if you call it premise, it will be a proposition. So I'm not pronouncing it in that fashion. Now, if you see a proposition is having the potency to be inferred in some other way as well, if it has, right? And
would it make any difference? Would it make any difference if I said a proposition is one that has the potential to become a premise?
A proposition,
Every proposition has a potential to become a premise.
Every proposition has the potential to become a premise. There is absolutely no doubt about it. Every proposition has. That's not the thing. But whether those propositions which are taken as premise in an argument has the potential to come out also with a conclusion, and especially in the syllogistic reasoning, is debatable, or in fact is something where you will find that there are certain results which are possible and there are certain results which may not be possible.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I don't want to kind of hair splitting kind of argument, but that's okay.
जैसे बात करते हैं, जैसे जो स्टेट करेंगे, स्टेट जो होगा वो तो कंक्लूजन हो या क्लेम होगी, स्टेटमेंट क्लेम है। तो मान लीजिए कोई कहता है कि पर्वतः वह्निमान्, पर्वत पर आग है, ये स्टेटमेंट कर दिया, क्लेम कर दिया। तो ये तो हो गया, मान लो कंक्लूजन, हमने क्लेम कर दिया, ये कंक्लूजन हो गया। अब जैसे कोई डिमांड करता है कि आप ये क्यों कह रहे हो, तो सीधे धूमात कहेगा, धूमात। तो ये जो धूमात कह रहा है, ये एक तरह से कॉन्टेक्स्ट क्रिएट कर देता है तुरंत। पर्वतो वह्निमान् तो कोई स्टेटमेंट कर दिया, और जब तक कोई उस पर सवाल नहीं करेगा क्यों आप ऐसा कह रहे हो, तब तक वो कॉन्टेक्स्ट की बात ही नहीं आती है। तो कॉन्टेक्स्ट क्रिएट कहाँ से होता है? कॉन्टेक्स्ट क्रिएट करने के लिए कहते हैं जब ये डाउट होता है। डाउट एक ऐसा कंपोनेंट है जो कॉन्टेक्स्ट क्रिएट करता है, और उसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आर्गुमेंट का फॉर्मेशन।
डाउट इन रिस्पेक्ट ऑफ व्हाट? वहां पे
हाँ, whether there is fire or not, ये एक डाउट का सिचुएशन हो गया।
ओके।
तो जब डाउट हुआ तब आपने क्लेम किया, डाउट ने ट्रिगर किया आपको क्लेम करने के लिए, whether there is fire or not.
Fine. Suppose somebody were to say, I mean, this is only for argument's sake. How do you say that there is fire? Somebody says, oh, because it is raining.
Because it is raining.
Yeah.
तो आपने कह दिया कि ये पानी की वजह से। तो तुरंत फिर बात और आगे बढ़ेगी कि ये कैसे है, क्योंकि हम दोनों तो ये मानते हैं कि जो धुआं है, धुआं के देखने से फायर को हम एस्टेब्लिश करते हैं। पानी को देखने से तो कभी हम फायर एस्टेब्लिश नहीं करते हैं। तो
So that is
जो
obvious. That is obvious. I was only giving this example
हाँ,
for argument's sake. So therefore, here in this case,
हाँ,
because it is raining, therefore there is fire on the mountain. This will not go through because rains provide no ground for saying that there is fire, isn't it?
अगर ये देखें कि जैसे कहें बिकॉज देयर इज रेन देयरफॉर फायर,
Hmm.
तो ये बिकॉज देयर इज रेन इट डज नॉट गो विथ द प्रेजेंस ऑफ फायर. बाय ऑब्जर्विंग रेन you cannot infer fire because water cannot go along with fire. They have viruddha dharma, they have opposite nature.
All that is understood. I was just making a point again, going back to this premise pair of inconcludent premise pair. Why should I call them premise?
Premise, yes, that is in fact important question, because the understanding of premise is so tied to the understanding of conclusion that it cannot be separately understood in complete oblivion to conclusion.
Right. And therefore, then this distinction, as Sumanta began, this distinction, what's the point of making this distinction?
Yes, that is the question, in fact.
When you already have in the category of concludent pair of premises, the possibility of that pair of premises may produce a result which is invalid. Do I understand you correctly?
What would be the qualitative difference between the concludent pairs producing invalid conclusions and the inconcludent pairs always producing invalid conclusions? Concludent pairs with invalid conclusion and inconcludent pairs with invalid conclusions.
In fact, I will like to thank both Professor Mishra and Dr. Tiwari. आप दोनों जो हैं एक point बहुत अच्छा कह रहे हैं, which is very important for this study. देखिए, inconcludent pairs are basically like you can drive them out of syllogistic logic because they will not produce anything, right? So Mishra sir, what he's saying that why we should make the distinction, I guess so we do not need to even make the distinction. As soon as we find that these are inconcludent pairs, throw them out first thing. Now we are left with concludent pairs, right? So, and Tiwari ji is very right in pointing out this, that concludent pairs producing invalid syllogisms as well as inconcludent pairs producing invalid syllogisms will have no quality difference. They will be not qualitatively different from each other because both are producing invalid results. That is the truth. Now, if you see the line of study or the line of argument of Aristotle as well, मैं आप लोगों को थोड़ा सा बता देता हूँ. Aristotle, when he talked about figures, है ना, तो उसने क्या किया था? What he did, he said that okay, if we have an argument like this, so we can we have a syllogism like this, so result will follow, right? Acha, he never said middle term, major term, minor term the way we say it. Again, it is an addition later by Alexander, है ना? Aristotle gave three different definitions of the middle term in the first figure, in the second figure, and in the third figure. Look how he approached. उसने क्या किया? He took an argument and saw that okay, whether this argument is a something which is a syllogism. मतलब उनका कहना था कि when you say to form a syllogism, इसका मतलब हुआ कि this will form a valid syllogism. So he said that okay, these premise pairs will form a conclusion like this. So ये बनता है. फिर उसने देखा कि अगर इसको ऐसे करके घुमाएंगे और ऐसे करके क्या रिजल्ट आता है, तो फिर बोलता है कि हाँ इसमें आता है या इसमें नहीं आता है, समथिंग लाइक दैट. तो जो पूरी की पूरी स्टडी थी उसमें सिलोजिज्म्स आए पहले, उसके बाद फिगर्स आए, है ना. तो उसने बताया कि ऐसे एक फिगर में इस तरीके से सिलोजिज्म्स फॉर्म हो सकते हैं, इस फिगर में इस तरीके से सिलोजिज्म फॉर्म्स हो सकते हैं, और इस फिगर में इस तरीके से सिलोजिज्म्स फॉर्म हो सकते थे. तो मतलब क्या, और उसने साथ में ये भी बताया कि भाई इस फिगर में इस केस में कोई सिलोजिज्म फॉर्म नहीं हो सकता. तो व्हाट ही वाज ट्राइंग टू स्टडी वाज, या अगर मुझसे पूछेंगे, आई डू नॉट नो, आई एम नॉट हिज सोल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव, but definitely मुझे ऐसा लगता है that he took arguments and saw that okay, there is a structure which is forming, and that structure is a structure which will be always having this kind of result. and उसने ये भी देखा कि कुछ स्ट्रक्चर्स जो है किसी भी तरीके का रिजल्ट प्रोड्यूस नहीं कर पाते. दैट इज द आइडिया. तो ये जो एक्चुअली क्या हुआ, मिडिवल लॉजिशियंस के ऊपर बहुत सारा मतलब लोग जो है काफी कुछ कहते हैं. आई एम नॉट अ पर्सन लाइक दैट, सो आई विल लाइक टू एब्सटेन फ्रॉम दैट, बिकॉज मिडिवल लॉजिशियंस का भी जो कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन टू सिलॉजिस्टिक है, इट इज अमेजिंग. लेकिन what medieval logicians, the trajectory which medieval logicians followed was not either represented by Aristotle or somehow could not take the soul of the syllogistic study, जहां पे syllogistic study ये बताने की कोशिश कर रही थी कि ये चीजें हैं जो कि इंपॉर्टेंट हैं, जिससे कि कुछ निकल सकता है, बाकी चीजें छोड़ के फेंक दो, भगा दो. ठीक है. On the other hand, medieval logician tried to figure out कि क्या क्या और चीजें हैं जिससे क्या क्या चीजें नहीं बनेंगी या क्या क्या चीजें बनेंगी. जबकि अगर आप लाइन ऑफ थिंकिंग देखें एरिस्टोटल का, he was talking about pair of propositions जो रिजल्ट निकाल सकते हैं, इनको छोड़ के रिजल्ट नहीं निकलेगा. तो he was trying to make the list shorter. On the other hand, medieval logicians expanded it and glorified it with this understanding that look, we found so many syllogisms which are valid. Actually they were different names of the same syllogism. In fact, जो एरिस्टोटल की पूरी स्टडी है, जिसमें कि हम बात करते हैं कि मतलब एरिस्टोटल, मैं मिश्रा सर को कह रहा हूं, सर एरिस्टोटल नेवर यूज्ड दिस कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन, never used the concept of say existential fallacy or illicit major or illicit minor, कुछ नहीं यूज किया उसने. What he used, he tried to change every syllogism into the first figure syllogism और कहता था first figure syllogisms are an axiom. अगर फर्स्ट फिगर सिलोजिज्म का स्ट्रक्चर रेप्लिका बन सकता है तो फिर वो सिलोजिज्म उस फिगर में भी वैलिड होगा. दैट वाज द आइडिया ही टुक. एंड ये फर्स्ट फिगर सिलोजिज्म्स क्यों वैलिड होंगे? बिकॉज ही फाउंड दोस स्ट्रक्चर्स टू बी वेरी स्ट्रांग एंड दोस पेयर्स आर कॉन्क्लूडेड. बाकी नहीं हो पा रहे हैं. और ये जो हम बारबरा, कैलरैन, डेराई, फेरियो, ये जो नाम देते हैं ना, ये जो मिडिवल लॉजिशियंस ने नाम दिए थे, एक्चुअली ये नाम जो है कुछ नहीं बताते हैं एक्सेप्ट फॉर कि किसको कन्वर्ट करना है, किसको ऑबवर्ट करना है, किसको कॉन्ट्रापोजिशन करना है, एंड यू विल फाइंड द सेम सिलोजिज्म. जैसे कैलरेंट एंड सेसारे आर नथिंग बट द सेम. आप एक बार जो है उसके प्रेमाइस को ट्विस्ट करिए, सेसारे विल बिकम कैलरेंट. दे विल एग्जैक्टली लुक लाइक द फर्स्ट फिगर सिलोजिज्म, है ना. तो ये जो चीजें थी या ये जो बातें थी, we somehow missed in between the way Aristotle took syllogistic logic and the medieval logicians. Definitely they have a lot of impact and I'm not undermining them. They really had a lot of impact and they worked very hard and made logic, especially Aristotle's logic, so popular in the say in the I will call it the क्या कहते हैं इसको, एक तो इनका कौन सा लैंग्वेज है, एक तो अरेबिक है और दूसरा ये जो लैटिन में एंड अरेबिक में जो है एरिस्टोटल की थ्योरी को पॉपुलर करने में इनका बहुत बड़ा हाथ है. लेकिन फिर लैटिन, उसके बाद अरेबिक, उसके बाद जर्मन और उसके बाद इंग्लिश जो उसकी बनी, उसमें कहीं ना कहीं कुछ और प्रॉब्लम्स हुए, जिसके कारण से हम अभी भी, or maybe we still are in the process of unearthing a lot of other materials from Aristotle where we will understand even the line of reasoning better. He talked about concludent, और ये जो है ये पैडजिक ने जो है ये नाम दिया था concludent and inconcludent pairs वाली बात. It's not something which I got or I came out with. I just showed with the help of Venn pairs diagram that this distinction makes a lot of or gives us a lot of insight कि कैसे syllogism form होगा और कैसे नहीं हो पाएगा. That is the idea.
We did our time also.
Yeah.
Well, it was a very nice presentation, very enlightening. I found it very enlightening, and I thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.